Happy to be here to talk about Aspire in .NET 9. Happy for the release. Hope you're all watching with excitement. Now, we're going to have a fun conversation about the future of Aspire. There's been a lot of buzz about Aspire over the last year. We've released Aspire 8 in March at Build, and now we're releasing 9 in November. And I wanted to kind of take a step back and explain kind of where we see Aspire as it is today and where it may be going in the future. Now, bit of a disclaimer, no one has seen this stuff yet. So this is important. I want to put Aspirations somewhere in the talk so it's there. So super important, I asked Copilot to write me a disclaimer for what you're about to see. This isn't a promise, it isn't a guarantee. This is a lot of discussions that the team has had, discussions with customers, discussions about where it might be going based on kind of what we have built. So heads up, if you're seeing something in this talk, make sure you've watched this part because this isn't a promise, right? Okay, perfect. And the team hasn't seen this, and you're seeing it at the same time as them. So great. Team, let's go. So Aspire started with, if you've watched our presentations, there's kind of been built on this history and experience of us building things like, open telemetry into the stack and building things like Tide, those experiments that we built in the past. And a set of us engineers kind of got together for one day, and we sat in front of a whiteboard and said, what are we trying to solve? So the high-level goals were, we want to lower the barrier to building apps that have multiple parts. We want to make sure that we have some opinions because we know in this space, you can choose, mix and match lots of different things. So one of the main things we wanted to do was to have some opinions. We weren't sure what that meant, but that was one of the things we wanted to do. And then the original goal was to target cloud-native applications. All right, so that's what we set out to do when we were kind of trying to ideate on what Aspire is and what it would be. What we ended up building is this, what I've been calling a platform. It's kind of a platform that allows developers to build curated experiences for local dev, testing, and deployment. And I think if you were to look at Aspire from 300 feet view, you would see, okay, it has this feature and that feature. What is it? Is it tooling? Is it a deployment experience? It's all of the above. The reason Aspire works well is because we did all the pieces to accomplish those goals. So what we ended up with is this platform that allows us to kind of build and extend local development experiences, testing experiences, deployment experiences, all in this kind of one platform. That platform can be used to build applications of any form, but that is kind of I think what we ended up with given the overarching goals we set out to do. What does that mean? So the Aspire team, I think after the first couple versions, we found this kind of core platform that was forming out of the bits we were trying to build. We have this core platform where you have this app host project that kind of centers orchestration and deployment and all these other things. And then we build integrations for various popular components like Redis, integration for Redis, Postgres, SQL Server. Those ended up being kind of extensions of the core platform. So I think the way we see Aspire is there's this base platform where you get a dashboard, you get this kind of APIs to modify dashboard state and show UI. You get APIs to express deployment concerns, testing concerns, and then all the specific instantiations of specific integrations are just extensibility on top. So we want you to figure out what is the best way to use Aspire for your needs, right? Aspire isn't just what the team ships. It is what you build on top of it that makes it valuable, right? We've had customers take Aspire and build insane, crazy things on top of it. And we want to encourage more of that because that drives the platform and makes it better for everyone else. So I'm going to run through now. So here's the fun part of the presentation. That was the backstory. This is about enumerating kind of what you can do with Aspire and what we are looking forward to doing potentially in the future. All right. So let's talk about development first because Aspire is extremely, extremely, extremely valuable for local development. That isn't the only purpose, but that is one of the primary things that it improves day to day. So let's talk about this feature I am calling how to reload. Right now, when you spin up an Aspire app host, it'll spin up containers, projects, all these custom resources in the app host. Dashboard pops up. You get a new tab in the browser, and you can kind of change, see the logs and traces and metrics and do all kinds of custom things in the UI. If you have bigger projects, it's a pain to kind of spin up and spin down the entire world. What if we could make everything more persistent? So you run the project, you launch everything up, and then when you change an individual project, when you change an individual thing in the app host or resource, it'll understand the changes, do a diff, and update the dashboard real time. The dashboard would stay alive, across multiple runs, and you would see the resources change as your code changes in the application. That would make everything much faster. There'd be no expensive waiting for processes to shut down and spin up. It would just make things feel better. And then one of the big things people ask for is, can I have a button to attach the debugger from the dashboard? You can see with these experiences, that becomes a requirement, because every launch, you want to be able to kind of attach, detach, change what things get started. So we want to figure out how to make the overall experience for local dev faster and more persistent. All right, polyglot support. In Aspire, we shipped, I think, 2 first-class kind of plugins so far for different languages, Node.js-based hosting integration, and we ship a Python integration that I think is currently in preview. I think over the time we've kind of seen people use these extensions, we built the bare minimum. I think going deeper with polyglot support would mean something like, imagine F5ing in VS Code, having a Python app, a JS front end, and a backend .NET app. And when you F5, it would attach the debugger with the right semantics to each process. And you could step through things individually, VS Code and VS, and it would all just work. That's kind of like the thing we're looking for. Imagine if you ran those in containers. So you ran Python in a container or .NET in a container, we would make debugging work well, right? Those are things that are really hard to do and configure today without you having to read tons of documentation, figure out things, bind together. What if we just made OTel for those languages just work out of the box, right? Today, there's a lot of work required to get JavaScript and Python going for OTel. We would just make that work out of the box, and then support for deployment. So giving the same touch that we give for .NET to these kind of first-class languages. The toolkit for Aspire that we announced yesterday also has support for like Go and Rust and other languages. We would have that same pattern replicated for those as well. So crazy ideas, but I think it would make the experience kind of much, much better. Has anyone ever tried to do TLS locally in a container? As Aspire kind of continues to grow, we see a lot of demand and desire for being able to securely manage containers locally, being able to test with host names, so you can test like subdomain, routes, etc. People have been doing this today by changing host files on the machine, requiring admin rights. What if we could make this like super simple using .local domains? .local is a TLD reserved, so you can't have a public domain name that's .local. So it would be perfect for this kind of thing. So we want to make the experience such that you could choose to use localhost, or you can choose to opt into this model where you get host names per application. So we're starting at the very I think easy, everyone's gonna nod and be like, yeah, this makes sense kind of features. If you can see that, I have this hacked up version with the .local address here. That just kind of shows the potential of what we can do. Okay, now we're getting warm. So what if I could run my project as a container? For anyone who had used Project Thai, there was a feature where you could just say, run my project as a container. I don't want to make any changes. Just do the right thing for me. We want to make that possible as well in Aspire. And one of the challenges with being in a container is all the things that you think should work don't work. Debuggers don't work. Networking is broken. Various APIs that assume you're on your local host network just break down completely. So when we do this with support, everything that works today, telemetry, egress, HTTPS certificates, all that stuff needs to continue just working. right? So that's one of the big things. And then we learned that there's a lot of Docker alternative runtimes on various OSs. We've been teaching a bunch of Aspire workshops all over the world, and there's always someone that has like a new container runtime that's not Docker, but it's Docker compatible that we haven't made work yet. So I think one of the things we want to investigate is what are the popular container runtimes cross-platform to see like how to make that work as well. And here's an example of what that might look like. I have a project, and I can just say run as container, and it will do the right thing, do the needful. I can mount volumes and do all the things containers can do with projects. So that would be a thing that we would potentially add in the future. All right. So proxies and networking. One of the things Aspire attempts to do is when you're trying to orchestrate multiple processes, projects, containers, remote resources that all run in one orchestration, we want to treat the network like a single unit. That's difficult, but we do our best to kind of make sure that if you go from container to container, you stay within a network that makes sense, or if you go from container to host, or if you want to have your container talk to your project, et cetera, that all has to work. There are more configurations that are also pretty interesting. What if you wanted to test out a webhook? So you have this remote service hosted somewhere else, and it's going to send requests to your local machine. To make that work, you need something like DevTunnel. So what if I want to test Event Grid or Twilio or something that did a webhook call to my application? What if in the app host you could say, create a DevTunnel and open up this to this project, and then pass that to this endpoint for Event Grid and have it all just work? And then what about ingress? There's a issue on the Aspire repository talking about how we should have a first-class ingress story, and I agree. And so we do plan to, in the future, integrate YARP in a first-class way into the Aspire experience. What that could look like is, here's an app host with a made-up DevTunnel resource, and the idea here is that you tell the DevTunnel what resources you want to proxy for. That would internally figure out the right endpoint information to kind of expose. And then I could pass that endpoint to this Event Grid webhook API. So you can imagine doing this today by hand is running tool A, getting information, putting the URL in the right place. So one of the things Aspire aspires to do, and I think excels at, is taking disparate tools and then making the configuration burden between them go away. So I say, give me a DevTunnel, map it to this endpoint, and then pass that endpoint into this other resource, and have that all just work. I can't see the chairs, but I know there's hands clapping, because this is like super hard to do. I believe you. I believe in you. Yay. Team development. One of the things that we haven't historically spent a lot of time on, I think, as a team overall, is like thinking about how teams do development en masse. So I have a big team. There's team A, team B, team C working on different services. How could I make it so that one team could build a service and produce a hosting and client integration package from their project? So I'm team B. I want to consume team A's service. Team A publishes a NuGet package to some internal feed that I can then consume into my app host and then use like a normal service, right? We want to make that experience more first class. Another scenario is being able to consume shared secrets. What if you have a shared key? The team has a subscription for OpenAI or Twilio or whatever, and you're storing API keys in Key Vault, and you want to have that be the same key that everyone uses, right? How do we make that easier today? I think teams all have bespoke ways of how that's managed. What if we could make it standard? What if we could make it all just work? And then a lot of teams have shared infra that they dev against. Maybe that's the thing that we spend time on. Like, how do I talk to a set of resources that are already in the cloud in a first-class way in Aspire? Here's more code snippets that are made up. I have this, my team labels key vaults based on the environment. So there's a key vault for development, one for staging, one for production. And in my app host, I want to say, use the existing key vault and reference this key vault secret and pass that secret into my project. And this would do all the magic required in dev and in other environments to make it such that it just pulls the right information from the key vault and does it in a very secure way. This feels magical, but I will tell you, like, getting this done in a secure way across teams today is very manual. Teams have to manually configure key vault with the right access. That's difficult to manage. Who puts the secret in, who rotates it. Like, we want to help automate more of that end-to-end. Remote development. This one is actually not too far off. In the next version of Aspire, whatever version that ends up being, there's going to be a more first-class support for things like GitHub code spaces. So you'll dev in a code. You can dev in a code space with Aspire, and it will have all the right configuration done so proxying just works. We see that as an opportunity to make bootstrapping dev environments much easier. So combine Aspire and dev containers, and now you have this single way to kind of get an image, get a repo, pull it down, and you're auto-configured to be in a working dev environment. Bootstrap my entire environment for me. This also applies to the dev box scenario. And we think this opens the gateway for being able to do really more secure cloud dev. Today, if you want to talk to an Azure resource from your local machine, doing that in a super secure way is very difficult. This could make it much, much easier. I'm good for time. OK, now we're getting into more made-up stuff. So remember, disclaimer is that this is not real yet. Aspire CLI. Why have one? So when you run Aspire today, you use .NET. .NET Run, .NET Publish, .NET Pack. That is a fine thing to do. But what if we could build functionality that is not a part of the dashboard, but in command line form, or commands for deployment in the CLI? So there'd be a first-class launcher for running, for doing operations like things in local dev, like give me the logs, give me these, give me the logs, give me the resource list, et cetera, in a CLI-friendly way. And then for testing as well. So here's an example of what that could look like. Here is the Aspire run, would run the application, Aspire logs to give me the streaming logs for a specific API. And then I added some commands made up at the bottom to generate the infrastructure for various clouds. And the idea would be that these are extensible. The publisher isn't built in. You would have to plug in a NuGet package to enable publishers in the app host. And then doing full deployment in that way as well. So crazy ideas. We're going to get crazier as I go along. This is just kind of a reminder to everyone that one of the things we want to encourage is people building high-quality integrations with Aspire. I hope the message got in to everyone in the keynote and in the What's New that integrations are an integral part of what makes Aspire successful. So we want to make sure that everyone is kind of feeling as though if you don't see your thing, your package, your service in the box, that's a signal to build it yourself. Go build these integrations, contribute to the toolkit. We want to have the ecosystem kind of building these things and making it better. All right, time is going down. Now we jump to more crazy. Support for more deployment targets. This isn't controversial. Right now we support an end-to-end with Azure Container Apps. And I want to make a point here that support here means first-class support in Aspire, where if you want Aspire to do the deployment on your behalf, we don't have support for these things today. If you want to deploy to these places manually, that all works. So just as a heads up, this is more about, can we make it easier? Can we make it first class to target these environments specifically? So we want to support Compose, Kubernetes, all these places, container-based platforms on every cloud. We want the dashboard to be supported in those environments too in a first-class way as well. We want that to all just work. Team deployments. A lot of teams don't want to deploy their own infrastructure per dev. So what if we can share a container app environment and everyone deploys to the same environment? These are some basic things that we have to do that we're going to end up doing eventually that aren't done today. It's coming, I promise. All right, so this one is absolutely not a thing that anyone has agreed to. But I think one interesting thing that I think is a potential future is What if you could run the app host during deployment? And what I mean by that is today when you do a deployment via either Aspirate or the Azure Developer CLI, you run AZD up, and that will, it runs the app host to get a manifest. The manifest gets pulled out, and the app host gets killed. And then AZD, does some work to build the overall deployment. What if instead, when AZD invoked the app host stayed alive? So during deployments, you could run code in that context. What that would allow you to do is do things like seeding databases, setting up keys, doing all the imperative steps that are really hard to do, that you have to kind of script together in GitHub Actions or an Azure pipeline. What if you could kind of like intermingle those steps for a deployment specifically in the app host? Here's a crazy example where I'm going to opt in to using AKS by calling a method. I added the package, Aspire hosting AKS. And I have this subscribe event for when the database is ready. So I deploy to Kubernetes and the database isn't up yet. In theory, this feature would do health checks from your local machine to make sure that the environment is ready. And then when it was ready, it'll run the seed operation on your remote deployment. Absolutely crazy, difficult to do in a secure way, but part of the goals of Aspire is to figure out how to get rid of all the configuration burden and make these things that should be simple, right? You don't have to worry about figuring out security, networking. What if we could do it for you? We understand what you're doing. We understand what you're trying to get done. So you're expressing your intent, and then we make it work under the covers. OK, there must be an Azure slide, because this is actually really important. In the full length of time, we will support all the Azure resources. We are working with the Azure SDK team to make sure that is fully featured. There'll be deep integration with Entra for things like authentication. We're having a discussion with that team pretty soon. We want to enable least privileged access to Azure resources. So you can say something like, I want to use storage, and I want to only read from this one and write to that one. And then we want to be able to, we want to enable customers to say, I want to apply my company's cross-cutting policy for security, for naming conventions, for whatever else to Aspire deployment. So make it so. Here's an example of how that might look like. I have builder.add my company policy, and I have a producer consumer type model where the web front end is producing a message, and the background service is consuming a message. And I can see they both reference service bus, but the producer is the sender and the consumer is a receiver. So that kind of gives you a sense of kind of what we're aiming towards. All right, more fun, more crazy. If anyone has ever done an Azure deployment, there's a way to kind of run code during a deployment on the server side. So I guess if we're going to zoom out and talk about deployments, you could, when you're deploying, run all the code on your local machine. That's bad. You could do it in CI/CD. That's better, but it isn't the best. What if something fails? What if it part of the deployment fails and you have to retry and roll back? So what I think more mature teams do is they kind of deploy in an idempotent fashion to the server. And the server has this process of kind of retrying things over and over until it succeeds. So when you use the ARM, you can kind of run code in the context of a deployment. So I can say I want to see the database, and by the way, that database is needs access to this resource to do it, and it must run in this network. So you can kind of model arbitrary code, arbitrary scripts, right, to run in that context. What if you could just write some C# in the app host, and that we do all the work to package it, upload it to a blob storage, download it, and run it in the deployment script? Absolutely crazy, but doable. So there's an example of doing database seeding using a deployment script in code. And then I got the shebang left. I got a bit of seconds left. What if we could stop having discussions about which is better architecture? What if you didn't have to pay for your choices up front? What if you could start with a single app and then split as needed, right? It would require a lot of language features and stuff, but what if that was possible? let me hit you with something random before we go to questions. This application looks kind of crazy. It's an app host with a minimal API embedded. This is an inline program, so it's kind of mixing infra concerns and app concerns in the same application. So I'm spinning up service bus. I'm passing that reference, with reference to my overload of map post message that has this attribute that says I want to inject the client from that resource directly into my code. This kind of blurs the line between like what is runtime and what is provision time. Fun story, I built this prototype way back in the beginning of Aspire, but it is way too crazy to kind of do as a first step. But I think in the eventual time frame of what we can do with Aspire, this is a potential outcome of what we can end up building. And there's more. There's potential future that we can get to. This is just a tease of what you can build. One of the main things to take away is that this doesn't just need to be us. It's extensible. It's a new paradigm. Learn how it works. Hopefully, we have a lot of good docs that explain that. And we want you to be creative and kind of express, whatever your team needs.